I'm Zoe Delahunty-Light, and I've played, screamed at, and finished the Callisto Protocol, and then gone back to make sure I kill Jacob in all the possible ways, so I have quite a bit to say about it. Make sure to keep an eye on the Eurogamer channel for the Callisto Protocol tips I have for you and all the death animations from the game, because, like me, some of you are just morbid enough to want to see them all. But anyway, enough of the preamble. Here's 5 things I liked about the Callisto Protocol and 2 things I didn't. The Callisto Protocol's combat is intense, unique, and based on a deadly rhythm. The closest thing I can compare it to is Arkham, with chunky melee combat that demands you to be inches away from the biophages instead of relatively safe meters away with a gun. The rhythm within Callisto's combat is a welcome departure from what I was expecting as well, especially the dodging system. Dodging hasn't really been done in this depth before in a horror game, yet in Callisto it feels natural and fitting for someone who, to be honest, is probably used to bar brawls. Using your left stick instead of the usual circle button, Jacob weaves and dodges backwards and to either side, avoiding attacks while waiting for an opening to strike with his shock button. I mean, not technically his, I guess, but finders keepers. Which is fitting for a mainly melee game at the beginning. The rest of the combat places a lot of emphasis on movement rather than button pressing. Pushing the left stick backwards, for example, blocks as well. And this close quarters combat makes Jacob's vulnerability inescapable. Rather fitting for the initial prison setting, really, where the only people with guns are the guards and the robots. The Callisto Protocol looks incredible. Along with God of War Ragnarok, this is one of the few games I've played on the PlayStation 5 that really feel like a next-gen game. And what better way to use that amazing next-gen look than for its gore system. It's delightfully over the top, which is what we all wanted from the Callisto Protocol. Limbs go flying off, Jacob's head gets split in half, he feels for dismembered limbs when they get pulled off, and stomping on bodies shatters them apart. Trust me, it's real detailed. The lighting is truly first class too, making the skin look just right, and the facial animations are uncannily on point. They even get this cheek muscle bit just right when characters talk, which is often where animation can struggle. Detailed industrial levels are brought to life with warm oranges and yellows, so you're not walking through a sea of brown like it's 2009 again, with the interplay between dark and light masterfully executed. Much like Jacob. Sorry, Jacob. Okay, now time for one of the issues I have with the Callisto Protocol. Mini-bosses are repeated multiple times, and not in the way that Dark Souls does, where it kind of turns it into a normal enemy after you encounter it for the first time. Each repeated iteration of the same mini-boss is treated with the same pomp and circumstance as running into it for the first time. To be blunt, it gets real dull. There's no difference in its fight pattern or its health, and additionally, you're put in a space that doesn't lend itself to the combat that you've been cultivating for this entire game, instead with it emphasizing just how long it takes to reload or switch guns, also something I found irritating, making it frustrating in addition to being boring and a bit of a cop-out to have the same mini-boss appear 3 times during significant story beats. I just wish they could have given us 3 different mini-bosses. When it comes to the desire to keep Jacob's insides inside, unlike the biophages you'll come up against, you are constantly reminded that you're vulnerable. Healing isn't instant, instead you're forced to enter a torturously long animation to heal, and yes, you can be attacked mid-heal. It gives me flashbacks to saving in Alien Isolation. Add to that the fact that beasties hide in chests, lockers, and corpses. The moments when beasties jump out are infrequent enough that it doesn't feel like an overused gimmick, to the extent that I straight up forgot it was a thing until I was politely reminded. Then, these head bastards attack you from afar before you even had time to spot them, and with both of those things in tandem, it's not long before you fall into, what I like to call, Callisto Protocol's cycle of paranoia. You start on edge, because just look around you. Something scary happens, you relax and forget about being on edge to focus on the action, then something jumps out to scare you and you're back on edge again. It's worryingly effective. Biophages are familiar enough to know vaguely what you're getting into at this point. They have the speed of the necromorphs, yet with their own sporadic agility that allows them to vault hip-height cover, which forces you to use the environment to kite and impale them as, unlike shambling zombies, you're not going to be able to just avoid them. But biophages also have some fun, sarcasm, new ways to keep you on your toes. Callisto Protocol has this uncanny ability to wait until you get borderline cocky with an enemy, and then it decides to introduce a new biophage type, like these blind ones. Appearance-wise, they're always icky enough to unsettle, and even hours upon hours into the game, I'd catch sight of one of the blind boys from behind and feel my skin crawl because of those horrid tendrils twitching from the back of their neck. With their fleshy, boily, cancerous, and tumour-y design, biophages don't feel like a replay of necromorphs. I will say that because of their aggression, paired with their more humanoid appearance, unlike the bone scythes necromorphs wield from their shoulders, I didn't really feel as scared as I expected to be, so I describe the Callisto Protocol more as a horror action game than a pure horror game, kind of similarly to Resident Evil Village. However, Jacob himself is eminently likeable. He doesn't constantly natter, and on the off chance he says something, it's very relatable, like,
I hate this fucking place.
Or generally just wanting to get the hell off of Callisto. While I wouldn't say you get to know him particularly well, and there's not much mystery cultivated around his background until the very end of the game, Jacob is, to me, the ideal protagonist. He doesn't get annoying, he doesn't talk to himself to remind you of your objective, he doesn't vocalize the fact he needs healing, and finally, one of my pet peeves in video games, Jacob doesn't give hints when you have a minor puzzle blocking your way. The Callisto Protocol story is lacking, without the immersive environmental storytelling of Dead Space or any well-realised narrative for you to sink your teeth into either. There's not much emphasis placed on what's really going on in Black Iron Prison until you get about halfway to 3/4 through the game, with a few hints about what spawned the biophage outbreak, and unless you hunt down some specific locations yourself, you're going to be mainly occupied with fighting your way through the biophages instead of uncovering why they exist. Significant characters only become significant in the last sixth of the game, or kind of in the last 2 hours if I'm being super specific, which is kind of annoying. Your objectives are predictable and don't hold much weight, and you'll be left with a fair few questions at points that you just have to be patient with right until the very end of the game. Though there's no intrigue to tease the resolution of those plot points, especially as the characters don't really ask those questions for you. Though, I guess Jacob has enough on his plate as it is. Also, you don't get any time with the revelations at the end of the Callisto Protocol either, as the ending to the game is really rushed. My final reservation about the Callisto Protocol is that it can get quite samey with the environments. There's no drastic change in the kinds of places you explore, and without spoiling anything, 90% of the locations are industrial in appearance, and you will recognise reused assets, which is a bit of a shame. However, the superb lighting and atmosphere means you won't be constantly reminded of those repeated assets, if that makes sense. I wish I could have spent more time in the final handful of environments as they're special and mix up the feel of the game. Again, no spoilers, promise. And I'm just going to say it again, as it really is a bummer, there's simply not enough environmental storytelling in these locations to cultivate any kind of intrigue about the events at Black Iron Prison. In the end, despite my complaints, I would still absolutely recommend the Callisto Protocol. Its downsides aren't too annoying in the big picture, and although I wish the game was a bit more scary, the combat is rad and the biophages are novel opponents. If you're looking for horror action, you have it in buckets with the Callisto Protocol, so if that sounds ideal to you, then have at it. So that's what I thought of the Callisto Protocol. Are you planning to buy the Callisto Protocol, and if you already have it, what do you think of it so far? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, thanks very much, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Eurogamer, as we have a new video out almost every single day. Now I'm gonna go and apologise to Jacob for the 16th time in getting him killed in such viscerally interesting ways, so I'll see you next time.